Let's talk about the affordable housing crisis. It really feels like a puzzle, doesn't it? We see the problem everywhere. We know there are literally trillions of dollars in private capital just sitting there ready to go. So, why don't the pieces fit? Let's try and figure out what's really stopping us. First, let's just get a sense of the human scale of this thing. Because it's not just some abstract economic problem. That number you're looking at, 771,480, that's roughly how many people were experiencing homelessness on a single night in 2024. Get this, that's an 18% jump in just 1 year. These aren't just numbers, they're people, and these stats are stark. And for millions more, this quote just hits home. It's not only about being on the streets, it's about the constant grinding struggle. For so many people, as this says, the basic goal of a safe, stable home is just slipping away. It forces these impossible choices between paying the rent, buying groceries, or getting medical care. Okay, so this brings us to the real head-scratcher here. U.S. banks are sitting on trillions in assets. With all that cash on the sidelines, why can't we just build our way out of this shortage? What is actually stopping us from building the homes we so desperately need? So let's start by digging into the actual dimensions of the problem, because honestly, it goes even deeper than you might think. So, check this out. This chart shows us something called extreme rent burden. And what that means is, we're talking about more than 7 million low-income households that are forced to spend over half of their income just on rent. I mean, can you imagine that? Half of your paycheck is just gone before you even think about food or the power bill or anything else. That's the reality for millions of people right now. All right, so what are we doing to fix this? Well, for decades, the U.S. government has been using a handful of tools that are supposed to get private money into the game. But as one source described it, what we've ended up with is a patchwork of well-intentioned solutions that, frankly, just isn't getting the job done. And these right here are the two biggest pieces of that patchwork. You've got the Community Reinvestment Acts, or CRA, which is meant to push banks to invest in lower-income areas. And then you have the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit, or LIHC, which gives investors tax breaks for building affordable rentals. On paper, it all sounds pretty good. But this is the big question, right? If we have these huge federal programs, why isn't it working? Why are we still in this mess? Why are these well-meaning efforts falling so short? So let's take a closer look at that LIHCT system. As you can see, it's what our source material calls a highly complex bureaucratic system. So a developer has to fight for these tax credits, then they have to find this middleman called a syndicator to bundle them up, and then they sell those bundles to an investor, usually a bank. And all of that has to happen before a single shovel can even hit the ground. And of course, all those extra steps, all those what you might call wasteful intermediaries, the syndicators, the consultants, the lawyers, they don't work for free. Each one of them adds cost and delay into the system. And what's the result? Well, fewer affordable homes get built, and the ones that do end up costing way more than they should. But this might be the biggest flaw of all. The whole solution is temporary. See, LIHT properties only have to stay affordable for about 30 years. And now we're heading straight for what's being called an affordability cliff. By 2029, it's estimated that half of all these units will be at risk of just converting to market rate rent. We could literally erase decades of progress almost overnight. So if our main tools are slow, expensive, and temporary, what's the real barrier? Well, it turns out the biggest roadblock isn't a lack of money at all. It's a legal wall, one that was built almost 70 years ago for a completely different reason. And here it is, the Bank Holding Company Act of 1956. This law was passed way back in the shadow of the Great Depression. The idea was to stop banks from getting mixed up in risky, speculative businesses that could crash the whole economy. So the whole purpose was to build this really strong wall, separating the business of banking, deposits and loans, from everything else, from general commerce. That meant keeping the folks who handle our money separate from things like manufacturing or retail or, and this is the crucial part, real estate development. It was all about preventing another massive financial collapse. And here it is, this is the aha moment. Because of that wall, banks are allowed to participate indirectly. They can buy those tax credits we talked about, or they can lend money to developers. But what they are legally forbidden from doing is the single most direct and efficient thing, actually building the housing themselves. The law basically forces them to be passive financiers instead of active builders. So if that wall is the problem, what's the solution? Well, the proposal we're looking at argues for a much more direct approach, basically creating a specific, targeted gateway in that wall, just for affordable housing.
Just look at the difference this could make. On the left, you've got our current system, slow, expensive, full of middlemen, and creating housing that might not even stay affordable. And on the right, a direct model. Banks could invest straight into building homes. This would cut out the wasteful intermediaries, slash costs, and, best of all, it could be designed to guarantee permanent affordability right from the start.
Okay, now let's be real. Punching a hole in a wall that was designed to prevent financial meltdowns, that's a big deal. So if we're going to do this, we've got to have a framework to do it safely. We have to be really clear about the potential risks. First, you've got financial instability. What if a bank's housing projects go belly up? Second, you could have market distortion, where giant banks use their power to squeeze out smaller developers. And finally, there's the risk of what they call mission drift, where for-profit banks might be tempted to put profits ahead of people. But the proposal has an answer for each of these concerns. To prevent financial instability, banks would have to use totally separate, well-funded subsidiaries to wall off the risk. To stop them from distorting the market, you'd have strong anti-competitive rules. And to prevent that mission drift, you would write strict, non-negotiable affordability rules directly into the law. So this is really what it all boils down to. We are trying to solve a 21st century housing crisis using a legal framework from 1956, a framework designed for the problems of a completely different era. And it seems like that old framework is actively getting in our way. So the question we have to ask isn't whether we can afford to modernize these old rules, it's whether we can afford not to.